This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 360. Whatever happened to levelling up?
For years past, our industry had been strangled by the exchange value of our money.
You know what? This something for nothing economics isn't conservative, it's socialism.
It's not a debt crisis. Britain is not Greece, it's not Argentina. You issue the currency in which you borrow. And that means that you are never going to have the problems that Greece had or Argentina did.
This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
Well, one of the biggest problems that Britain faces is that so much of the wealth is concentrated in the southeast, and it only seems to be getting worse. So how can you have an efficient economy when one part of the country is subsidising the rest? And while we're on that, whatever happened to the levelling up agenda? It seems to have been tossed aside and thrown in the too difficult basket. So what should be done? That's this week on the Debunking Economics Podcast. Welcome along. So now Boris has gone, you know, that false promise of levelling up, his agenda that managed to cajole a few Labour supporters to vote Tory for the first time in the north of England. That seems to have gone with him, although Rishi Sunak has done his bit, I have to say, to help the north of England because, you know, at least for swimming pool installers.
They get away from the rivers, which are too polluted.
Yeah, well, but also he's built this swimming pool in his house, and for that they needed to up the power at the local power station. So he employed a few power workers as well to get enough energy to heat his new swimming pool. So there's some jobs being created in the north of England just by having Rishi Sunak and his vast wealth there. So a little bit of a growth pole, perhaps, in Richmond, in North Yorkshire. But generally, the UK's wealth is very concentrated in the southeast, and, you know, pretty much has been since the end of the Industrial Revolution, of course. I mean, actually, maybe, certainly since the 80s, it has become far more pronounced. And that is because, obviously, a chunk of the UK is now dominated by the financial services sector.
That's the thing, yeah.
Well-paid people who have nice houses in the south of England where the weather is better, and obviously if the weather's better, it's better for playing golf. So you're never going to get them to move out of the southeast. So, Steve, is that always going to be the way in the UK, do you think?
I was actually in Barcelona recently, and there was a quiz at the conference I was speaking at about what the various names of Barcelona were, and one of them was the Manchester on the Mediterranean, which is correct. Okay, that's what one way Barcelona was regarded, the Manchester on the Mediterranean. Why Manchester? Because that's where a huge part of the industrialisation of the UK occurred. So Manchester was an industrial powerhouse. Edinburgh and Glasgow and others were industrial powerhouses during the days of the Industrial Revolution. And you do have other countries which have numerous centres where different industries are dominant. The work of Michael Porter on what he called the competitive advantage of nations, not the comparative advantage, which is nonsense, but the competitive advantage, which is genuine, found that when you looked at a country and said, why does a country produce a particular commodity better than anybody else does? It was normally because of regional rivalries in a particular city. So if you look at, for example, Italy used to be associated with fast cars, you know, the Lamborghini, Ferrari, Maserati, etc., etc. They were actually originally tractor manufacturers.
Yeah.
And then they started, each family competing with each other in
tractors. Gradually got faster.
Huh?
The tractors gradually got faster.
Yeah.
And those tractor races, they were great fun, weren't they? And then,
they happened in America
they started to streamline them a bit, and there we were with Formula One.
Yeah. So it was actually, it tends to be regional innovation that leads to an industrial cluster developing, and then you'll associate an entire country with that product, but it's actually just a tiny part of the country that has that manufacturing capability and that competitive pressure. So you can't just sort of say in general you want to spread industry all over a country. what you have to have is those...
Because of the agglomeration effect, basically.
But an agglomeration can be distributed across the country in different locations. So, like in car manufacturing, it was one small number of towns in the north of Italy that became dominant that way. You could see...
By making bits of the car. Yeah, no one might focus on wheels and somebody else ashtrays and...
and textiles, and and so the Rubik's cubes. I mean, it's possible to imagine a distributed set of innovations, so that different regions become dominant innovators in that area, and therefore you've got it with a diversified industrial structure. You can have a diversified residential structure as well. It'd be worth living in Manchester because it's the production hub for X, and then Glasgow for Y, and so on. But if it's everything... The
reason I mentioned ashtrays, by the way, is because that was always the reason I mentioned ashtrays was because that was the argument for Airbus could be a pan-European business where, for example, the engines are made in Germany. I'm not sure what France makes. Well, it's pulling it all together, obviously, and maybe the fabrics are made in Italy. Yeah, and the UK would make the ashtrays. That would probably be our contribution. Yeah, exactly. But so that idea that you've got, but that's not happening now in the UK. I mean, we're not getting that growth. Manchester is no longer, the industrial centre it was. I'm not sure where Barcelona is right now, but
better than Manchester last time I went. But it's. You need a diversified industrial structure and pressure on innovation. Then you can get a distributed population centres where different regions are dominant in different industries, and that gives you a capacity for a diversified society. But Britain, by making the choice to go entirely services, it's all in London, it's all the city, and the productivity, inverted commas, you measure there is actually simply adding up the wages that are paid and the profits that are made by the firms, and we call that the output of the sector. Yeah, it's a totally artificial measure of that one sector, but that dominates the entire economy.
And of course, it's so extreme, isn't it? So the GDP per head in 2021, the GDP per head was 55,000 in London, 34,000 in the southeast, 28,000 in the northwest, including Manchester, 26,000 in Yorkshire, and less than 24,000 in the northeast and in Wales. So northeast, much less than half the GDP per head in London. It's a huge regional variation, isn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to gigantic salaries being paid in
London,
in the finance sector. It's not productivity; it's the huge wages. So it becomes a bargaining power thing. The finance sector's persuaded everybody that it deserves ridiculous pay rates, and they get them. They've got the bargaining power to get it. The workers in Manchester got screwed by shutting down the coal mines initially. And then the shutdown of the manufacturing sector as well. And once that's done, you don't have the skill base anymore amongst the workers to encourage manufacturers to decide to building a plant there. So again, it comes back to investment. You've got to find a way to motivate the investment. America's getting a lot of that now because of a relocation of production from China.
Back.
Yeah. Plus, you've also got...
Because of good old Donald Trump bringing it all back.
I'm going to let that one go through to the keeper. But like equally with...
I'm sure he's claiming the credit for it.
I'm sure he would be. But like the growth of innovation in aerospace right now is quite remarkable. So 3D printing works beautifully in aerospace. It's much more complicated to bring into other manufacturing processes. But that's turning up and meaning that you're getting a boost in aerospace industry across large parts of America.
It's complex and small volumes. That would be it, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And also really benefits from the latest in high technology. New Zealand has got a major competitor in the aerospace industry. Electric cars, so back to Musk again, that's forcing innovation not just on in his factories, the gigafactories, but also the existing manufacturers are looking at having to retool for that. So all that type of stuff can give you a distributed bunch of industries across a wide swathe of a country. But the UK, without the manufacturing base, again, is not going to be able to diversify away from the south of England.
And that difference of GDP per head being twice what it is, half what it is in London, in the northeast of England, is quite staggering, isn't it? Although I'm not sure if it's always the most useful measure, looking at GDP per capita. Because if you look at Australia, for example, then because of the mining industry, which obviously is very intensive in terms of infrastructure investment, with very few people working in it. 137,000 is the GDP per head in WA. It's 81,000 in New South Wales and 76,000 in Victoria. So WA has a GDP per capita which is, getting on for double what it is in Victoria. I mean, you wouldn't know that, would you? Knowing those states,
well, you'd think the other way around. You'd think the other way around, but again, that comes down to the machines.
Yeah,
and like when you look at the scale of machines that are involved in mining, are absolutely gigantic.
Yeah,
humans are
you
a
see
small
those
part of it.
Massive trucks driving themselves.
Yeah, and so you therefore get a huge. Your labour, inverted commas, productivity looks enormous. It comes down to the machines that are being used, and machines being used in Western Australia are much larger than the machines that are used in manufacturing and any other industry in New South Wales. So you get those distorted figures for labour productivity turning up out of that.
So the problem of regional disparity is that it becomes a bit ingrained, doesn't it? So people don't necessarily... the people in those regional areas, wherever we're talking about, very often don't want to move away because they don't want to move from their families. And if everyone moved to where the money is being made, like if everyone from Manchester moved down to London, then that would just add to the disparity. It would just get worse, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And regions become neglected. I'm not, then you get the argument, well, we're not going to invest in those areas because productivity is so low. People must not be used to working very effectively. So the incentive to invest isn't there. So you get less investment happening. It becomes a downward cycle, doesn't it?
Yeah, and like I've seen that usually in Europe. I remember being picked up in Zagreb and driven to a conference in another city in Croatia, and we went through a few villages, and my host just randomly said, "Oh, that village is empty." Literally nobody in it, and the reason is people are moving out of there towards the capital. So it isn't just exclusively a UK problem, that and particularly it comes out of having a service-dominated economy again, because the service sector tends to be just in the capital city, and you then forget the regions. And yet, if you have a distribution of manufacturing and agricultural systems, then you can have those regions still thriving, even though the city is the major agglomeration.
So China's probably was a good example, but it's not. I don't know if this is a good example anymore as a case study for this, because a lot of money was invested in real estate in regional China through so-called local government finance vehicles that were backed by banks and some institutional bond investors as well. But largely it was created money, wasn't it, that was there to try and pump up the supply of housing and
that
commercial
happened after the financial crisis, because like when 2008 hit, I think China's exports fell by almost 40% in 1 year. So they realised they had to get, you don't want unemployed peasants in China.
Yeah,
not a healthy political
situation. So we'll build
situation.
houses and we'll build factories or whatever,
but before that,
build it and they'll come, but they didn't, and so lots of these houses stayed empty.
Yeah, that was always going to be like ghost cities, and I've seen them. I know what they're like.
And that was because there's no control. I mean, there's no financial control.
Well, the financial control was actually imposed to say that give everybody with a pulse a loan and start getting construction boom to make up for the lack of export. So it was
ideally, preferably human with a pulse, but not necessarily. I've got a pet dog. My Chihuahua has got a loan as well. Is it anybody could get a loan? Is what you were saying?
Not quite that bad. Anyone human, but but China also is massively focused upon industrial development, obviously, and. Because I think there's about 25 major provinces in China, and the provincial governments each try to maintain have industry for their own people. So you've got a large number of industrial sectors scattered throughout the entire country. And maybe to some extent it's a reflection that in the UK there's the UK government and that's it. Your local councils are incredibly weak. You don't have any countervailing power. At the local level.
So is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think actually would like, to some extent, some local capacity to put pressure to actually have people who want to invest somewhere to try to get the investment going forward, putting government money into infrastructure and so on. So yeah, a stronger local council system.
If you've got the expertise, I've got one word to you on this. That word is Woking.
It's Woking.
Yes, because Woking Council, they invested in the commercial property market. I mean, they were using council money, which they didn't have. But they thought, well, if we invest in commercial property and we build lots of apartments, then we can be almost like the new Singapore, just outside London. Everyone will thank us for it, and won't we be marvellous? Instead, they ended up with a £1.2 billion pound hole in their budget. The cost of servicing that debt now is more than they are raking in council tax. So basically, it's a Conservative Party held government, that a council. So they've got to spend all their money servicing their debt before they can actually start spending money on services.
And
so
Woking is going to sleep as a result.
Exactly. And these big empty office blocks. So as you drive from here, you can actually look in the distance and you can see this glimmering city across this plain. You see it just shining there. That's Woking. But those buildings are empty. And the government is bankrupt. And that is because I don't know where the money came from, but they got investors involved somehow.
And it was all property speculation and building high rises.
And it was lack of expertise, I think, on the part. So the danger is you've got to have, if you're going to give the ability for local councils or county councils or whoever some sort of devolved responsibility, you've got to have the expertise there, and that expertise doesn't exist because they've not been confronted with that opportunity.
And
before.
You've also got the need for the manufacturers as well, the firms, the engineers in a region too. That's why I think I find Michael Porter's book a very useful guide to what actually leads to industrial development. And it's quirky. It comes down to having an entrepreneur and an engineer in some region, and often it's more than one. It has to be some competitive attitude between the two. So the example of Lamborghini versus Ferrari versus Maserati and so on, there was a market for cars at the time. And they were tractor manufacturers with a solid base that way, and they could innovate in their spare time and make fast vehicles to sell to the wealthy landowners in the region. And bang, that competition is what led to them becoming, for a while, the dominant manufacturers of high-performance vehicles. So it's that combination of a number of engineers in a certain region who want to stay in that region. And then coming
with the responsibility and the money. That's the issue now. And then it becomes the question of it becomes a question of administration. And I want to look at that when we come back to, for example, does the North of England would it benefit from not being the North of England anymore, but being its own country? For example, do we break things down, or at least a separate administrative region? We'll look at whether that would help when we come back on the Debunking Economics podcast. Steve Keen sitting opposite me. I'm Phil Dobbie. We are coming. We're going to go away, but we'll be back again very, very quickly.
This is the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
So we are looking at the regional divide. We're talking about the UK, but it really applies in many other parts of the world, to a lesser extent, I guess, in Australia, but it's still there, obviously. In fact, in Australia, it's pretty much state capitals versus the rest of the state, isn't it, really?
Australia's quite peculiar because its major cities are more than 10 times the size of the next largest city in that state.
Yeah.
The normal ratio is about a 3-to-1, so Australia's about 10-to-1. So it's extremely concentrated geographically.
And you drive out of Sydney in New South Wales, and you instantly see wealth disappear, don't you? I mean, it's quite staggering. In fact, the small town Australia is very different from capital city Australia in terms of the people, in terms of the just the amount of money that you can see in those economies is quite staggering. Now, look, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. I can see your eyes glazing over. They looked at how regional inequality could be addressed, looking at overseas examples like Fukuoka. Yes, I said that right. In Japan, Cleveland in the United States, Leipzig in Germany, and Nantes in France. They found successful outcomes for getting regional inequality addressed. And this isn't rocket science. Places that had a clear vision and well-defined strategy with the political will and a charismatic mayor or leader in that area. And actually, I think that last one...
A charismatic mayor. I think Boris Johnson's looking for a job.
Well, maybe he should move up to Manchester. I think Manchester's got one, actually. But, I mean, if you've got... That is a big part of it, isn't it? Having a spokesperson for a region who actually knows what they're talking about. Yeah. Who can actually encourage people to invest in that region. But to do that, they've got to have power as well. They've got to have the ability to make decisions.
And you haven't got that power in the UK, though. And this is one thing that I realised when I first moved here. With the way austerity was imposed was by reducing the amount of money that councils got from the federal government.
Yeah.
And then that they're completely dependent on that federal government revenue. And so they were, rather than being the way to develop the country, they're the way to impose austerity on the country.
Maybe it should work the other way around. Maybe the local government should collect all the tax, including the income tax, and then choose how much they want to pass up to the federal government. Maybe that's the way to do it.
Let's not get caught up in that one. That's going to be that MMT my head off at the moment. But yeah, you do. If you're going to have regional distribution of industry, you've got to have regional distribution of power as well, political and otherwise. And the UK system, everything is focused upon London. And like a huge part of if you look at the growth of neoliberalism in the UK, a huge part of it was crushing the trade unions, particularly the mining trade unions. And that meant because of most of the mining, places like Manchester and so on, that just broke the back of the political system there. And so once you've broken it, it's very, very hard to rebuild that drive to have a powerful local economy.
Do you remember a month or two ago we were talking about cities in the United States, and both of us, I think, were sort of appalled at the idea that you had... I mean, cities basically self-financing in the United States, almost run as private entities, aren't they? And the idea that they would be trying to attract investment, so they'd be competing against each other to try and bring investment into their city. And we were both saying, well, what a crazy idea. They're both in the same country and you're actually pitching against each other and spending more and more money to try and get a business into your city when really you just want to see it in the country somehow. And yet...
You need a countervailing power to some extent.
Yeah, the idea because we're the opposite extreme in the UK. So councils, they've got a history of just working to satisfy, what they'd see as their customers' needs, their residents. So they'll be looking at garbage collection, libraries, schools. They won't have any expertise at attracting investment, as clearly the case in working. Well, actually, in working, very good at attracting investment, but actually worthwhile investment that's sustainable. Not any experience at all, or helping to establish new industries, or having a plan. Which is what that paper from the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, having that clear vision, a strategy, the political will, and a charismatic leader. And you can see that would be the way forward. But can you do that in the current structure? You could do, for example, if the North of England was a country of its own. Because you'd have the leader of that country. Maybe you don't have to go all that way, but I just wonder, so long as you've got this dominant one centre in the southeast of England, is the whole of Britain being held back by that? And is it better actually just to break the country up? And I talk as a North of Englander here. And I tell you, there'd probably be quite a bit of support for that idea.
You mean more than just Scotland?
Yeah, I think if Scotland broke, that would be the beginning. But I mean, would Scotland survive? That's the question, and the answer is probably it would, because it would attract investment, because there would be that.
The issue then comes. My feeling comes down to the importance of having at least not running a huge trade deficit. Not me needing money from overseas all the time. So I'm not going to go down that particular route. I think
it's a step too far. But you would. But presumably,
there's an advantage to economies of scale, and this is one of the reasons why you do get agglomerations.
But without economies of scale, is entirely focused in the southeast of England.
That's the trouble, because if you have if you have a sector economy focused just upon services, then you're pretty much going to have one financial sector that dominates, and therefore there'll be one city that's huge. If you have manufacturing, you can have a range of different industries which happen to have regional strengths and regional, strengths for some industries, weaknesses in the same spot. So you'll have your textiles might be focused in Lancaster, and your machine tools might be factored in Manchester, and so on. So you need in industrial structure, and industrial economy gives you the capacity for diversity, and that diversity can be regional as well as industrial. But if you have just a services sector, then it's almost certainly going to be based in your capital city.
Yeah.
So you've got to, again, the move towards the services-based economy, I think, is one major reason why the UK has got its regional problems.
But if Scotland was a separate country, well, let's not worry about the North of England just now. Let's just focus on Scotland. So Scotland becomes a separate country, which we'll call Scotland. And
what a radical choice of name!
No, and it has its own government, and it maybe has its own currency. A totally sovereign nation. Okay, is it too small to get economies of scale? Well, there's lots of other smaller countries around the world. It might take a few years to get there, but if it attracts investment because maybe labour costs are lower in Scotland, it's got a ready supply of fresh water, which some industries might want. It's got a few industries which are very unique to Scotland, like the distilleries, which could be built on perhaps in some way to further other industries. It does have, if we decide we want to keep on getting North Sea oil, it's got oil resources. If not, it's got windy seas for wind farms, which it could export to the rest of the UK, for example, to help its balance of trade. It would mean it's standing on its own feet. Give it a charismatic leader, ideally one who's not fiddling the books, and either deliberately or otherwise. And you've got the makings of breaking out from that concentration in the southeast of England.
Well, you may be forced into it, and a large reason for it is the Scottish attitude that everything is focused in London, and the country's run for the benefit of London.
It's not that attitude; it's a fact. It's a fact.
It's a fact. Okay. Well, facts have feelings too. You can see that the regional disparities caused by, again, the focus on a service economy, a major reason for the sentiment for breaking away in Scotland. My worry would be, it's got to have its own currency if it ever does that, and would it be viable enough in a sort of essential industries, including food production, to be self-sufficient when necessary? Because I think that's going to be vital in coming years. So I'm ambivalent on that particular issue. But back to your point about a charismatic local leader and a vision of the local area. If you don't have that, then yes, people will move away. They're feeling there's no future in a particular region, and you can see that. Even in parts of France, you can see the same attitude. Those
charismatic leaders have already moved down south. That's the problem, isn't it? I mean, seriously. I mean, if you've got charisma and go in you, and you live in the north of England, you probably, unless you really are a strong supporter of the case for the north of England, you will have moved to where the money is for a better paying job, wouldn't you? That's the sad truth. But sorry, I interrupted your French example. Sorry.
I was thinking
one of those.
I was thinking of your Galloway example for a moment there as you were using a particular analogy. But yeah, it's there has to be something that we're.
Doesn't he live in Russia these days?
Huh?
That doesn't matter. Carry on.
Well, that'll go down well. You've got to. Again, manufacturing enables you to have that diversity. Services will not. So the main move I'd see for the UK is getting back to trying to manufacture more, not rely upon imports. And therefore that requires economies of scale to make it viable to do it. So you'd want to have still an integrated economy. I wouldn't want to see it being broken into smaller units than it's currently in. But you then have to have the diversity of manufacturing bases in different parts of the country to hold people in those parts. Otherwise, everything aggregates to London. But getting away from a services sector, I think, is the very first step.
Well, if you went from services to manufacturing, you probably would base the manufacturing up in the north of England because you'd be paying, first of all, you've got the space and you've got the lower wages. It's just the fact that sector doesn't exist. I mean, if it did exist, then it probably would be. It would be outside the southeast, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But because the southeast would be too expensive to.
Yep, the land's too expensive here. You haven't got the scale of water resources and energy resources and so on. So yeah, manufacturing would be the way to go, but that's not the way that Britain has gone.
And nor, I think, as you said last week, nor will it ever, probably. The horse is already bolted.
Well, you'd be forced into it if you find, if globalisation which relies upon cheap oil and cheap oil transportation, if that goes down the gurgler, you've got to manufacture the goods closer to home, then the deglobalisation is likely to reach the regrowth of regions.
So the government has talked about these free ports, hasn't it, which it's setting up around the country. So is that a good idea? Does that help?
I'm no great fan of it in terms of evading, using it to have cheap labour, to evading labour regulations and so on, which is the way a lot of those systems first came in. But what you want to get is that innovation and investment going once more. And free ports were one way that it was done successfully by countries like China. I don't know that that's going to be the solution in the area of deglobalisation. You would need domestic decisions to produce what you need domestically, and that is free ports aren't the way to do it.
So how do you kickstart? Because if the idea is, well, if we had a manufacturing base, it would move north. We'd start to see that disparity differ. But obviously one of the attractions of the north would be that labour's cheaper. So actually that disparity would be helping to drive that investment. But how do you kickstart it? I mean, because what would, for example, if we were to manufacture stuff in the UK, what would we make? Because we're so used to not making anything now.
That's the trouble. I mean, it's very hard to reverse deindustrialization, and that's what the West has done during the period of globalization. They've pushed all the industrial jobs into not all, but most of them into the third world, and what's left is a service sector runt and some local repair capability and assembly capability, but not the engineering in the very first instance. So if you realise, well, you can't import those things anymore, you've got to make them domestically, then you've got an enormous training deficit to catch up on, to train the engineers and to start building the machine tools you need for the manufacturing. And that's a huge turnaround.
Okay, I take your point about the economies of scale by keeping it all within the one country, but we could devolve more responsibility, couldn't we? So
I think that's essential. I mean,
we could allow for mayors of particular towns.
The extent to which the UK is dominated by London is dramatic. I mean, other countries like Amsterdam is important in the Netherlands, but so's The Hague and so's Utrecht, etc., etc. And Paris is obviously vital in France, but you get Lyon, you have your other regions that are essential and have different industries which are focused in those regions. The dominance of London, the dominance of the service sector, I think the UK has two major problems.
Yeah. So, and what about a bit more money up there as well?
You got to put the money there, and that's. But
I mean, not just investment money, but government money as well.
Money,
which could either be by saying yes, we're going to give more money in the form of funding local councils, but it could also be just one quick way of getting money out around the country, universally the same everywhere, is to say, well, okay, let's pay nurses more because they're everywhere. Let's pay police more everywhere where there's a public service worker which is spread geographically. If we pay them a bit more straight away, you've got the multiplier
spending
effect.
Domestically.
That they will spend in the local economy. That's an easy win, isn't it? You just got to do it. That's all.
I'm sure Richie Sunak will vote for that tomorrow.
I don't think
Jeremy Hunt will be backing him up.
I mean, that is the reverse is actually the issue, isn't it? As those salaries decrease and as less money is paid to the councils, then obviously these areas are drying up for investment and people are moving out.
Yeah.
And amongst those,
the great thing, they can't afford to move to London, so you get a double whammy there.
Yeah. Well, I guess but I mean, and those charismatic leaders, that's what we need. Whoever you are.
I think that's one thing. If I had to say what was wrong in the last 50 years, it's the lack of political leaders with charisma. Where was our Donald Trump when we needed him?
Well, we've got Kia.
Kia?
I must go now because I'm starting.
That was a car manufacturer? I thought that was Korean.
Just the mere mention of his name, I'm starting to fall asleep. We'll leave it there for this week. Once again, we haven't solved anything. Well, we have solved We've given the
more
answer.
power for the local
We've given
councils.
more power to local councils. Just don't do a woking on us. That's all we're asking.
Yeah, forget about property speculation, please. Leave that to London.
And the Boris equivalent, but actually with now some of his charisma, but with more expertise to help try and drive this new energy into the regions. There we are. The answer's there for anyone who wants to take it. If you're listening, Rishi or Kia. Oh, God, done again. Gotta go now.
Stop falling.
See you
Don't
next.
Snore on camera.
I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
The Debunking Economics Podcast.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.